Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Soul Rising podcast. We are all in on love, loss, and connection here. We talk all things human emotion, how it serves to connect us or disconnect us from ourselves, each other, and the universe, God, source, spirit, whatever you believe in. We are non-judgmental here. We are all accepting, all loving, all welcoming. So I'm glad that you're here today. Welcome back. If you've listened to the show before, thank you so much. If you're brand new, welcome. So glad that you're here. I always have wonderful guests, like I say. And today, I've been really honored and blessed to be a part of this Get Griefy collective. That I'm a part of this small business collective, this community of amazing, beautiful women doing so much good out in the world with their pain and their grief. And today, I have another very, very special woman. Her name is Erin Blechman. She's an author, speaker, and certified grief educator whose mission is to elevate the conversation around grief and loss, mental illness, and suicide. Her book, My Unexpected Journey, Reflections After Losing My Son to Suicide, chronicles the 18 months following the devastating loss of her own beloved son, Max, to suicide after his long battle with mental illness. Erin offers grief support to bereaved parents through online groups and community talks that seek to build greater understanding of mental illness, suicide, loss, and grief. Erin lives part-time in both Pennsylvania and Florida with her husband, Bill, and Max's former dog, Emmy Lou. I love that name. That's so cute. Their son, Sam, and his wife, Julia, also reside in Pennsylvania. So welcome to the show, Erin. So happy to have you.
Oh, thank you, Amanda. I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, for sure. Erin and I connected it was a while ago. We had a great conversation. I was like, yeah, I would love for you to come on our show because I mean, how painful the loss of a child. You know, like we say that there's no comparison, right? We don't like to judge. We don't like to put a value on anybody's loss or grief. But I'm just going to call it out. I think losing a child is probably the worst
Mm.
imaginable pain that a human being can go through. And the fact that you're doing like such amazing things out there with women. Why don't you tell us? Tell us a little bit about your journey, maybe a little bit about Max and your loss experience and what you're doing now.
Yeah. Thank you. So my Max was the most interesting person I've ever known. And I don't just say that because I'm his mom. He really was. He was just a intelligent, funny, quirky, sensitive little guy.
Mhm.
Very smart. He started talking in full sentences at 15 months. He read his first Harry Potter book between kindergarten and first grade.
Wow.
Just a really intelligent little person. Also really sensitive from the beginning. And he grew into an intelligent, sensitive, quirky, creative, bigger guy. Right before he left us, he was doing all sorts of creative things. He'd been in multiple bands. He wrote music. He wrote poetry, short stories. He did stand-up comedy. He did sketches. Um, he was really into sketching, I would say probably about a year and a half before he passed.
Mhm.
And he did special sketches for me, my husband, Bill, and his brother, Sam. And I actually had a portion of the sketch that he made for me turned into a tattoo that I
Uh,
got on my lower leg a year after he passed. But he was just a really incredible person. He was funny. Every time we were together, he made me laugh. He made me think. He was very philosophical. He was very much an advocate and an activist. He was always kind of looking out for the downtrodden and people that didn't have the privilege and advantage that he did. So he was really an amazing person. And he also struggled with a mental illness. He was diagnosed with major depressive disorder when he was 19. And that was the first time he was hospitalized for suicide ideation. And that continued over about the next 5 or 6 years. He just kind of got sicker and sicker. And we ended up losing him to suicide in June of 2020, right in the thick of COVID. I think COVID was definitely a factor because if you know anything about suicide, you know that it's not due to just one factor. He had a mental illness. He definitely had a genetic predisposition. He wasn't always the best at taking care of himself. You and I talked a little bit about self-care earlier.
Mhm.
Always the best at that. And then, of course, COVID. And so we ended up losing him. And, you know, looking back, in some ways, it feels like it was 100 years ago. It seemed like it was another lifetime ago. And then other times I think, did this really happen? Like, is this really
Mm,
my life? It's
yes.
I think that's the really strange dichotomy when it comes to grief.
Mhm.
It just kind of warps time. I don't know what else to say about it. But anyway, after he died, I fell into a deep depression myself. That summer, I had a hard time getting out of bed. And I understood for the first time just a little bit of what he dealt with all those years. I didn't understand it when he was alive. I probably wasn't as sensitive as he needed me to be, probably wasn't as compassionate. And so, that summer when I fell into a depression myself, I got a glimpse. And I'll be honest, Amanda, I really wasn't sure if I wanted to go on without him.
Sure.
You know, I remember my parents at the time lived in a retirement facility about 45 minutes away, and I have to take the highway to get to there, to visit them. And so I continued to visit them. And I remember multiple times driving home thinking, if I'm in an accident, so what? You know, like if I don't wake up tomorrow, so what? COVID was raging. I thought if I get COVID, so what?
Mm.
So it wasn't that I had a desire to hurt myself. I just really lacked the motivation and the will to live after he died. I mean, when you lose a child, it really feels like you lose a part of yourself. It really felt like I was walking out without a limb or with a piece of my heart missing, all those analogies that people use. I really felt that. And so one of the things that I did was I started to journal during that summer. Well, I did a lot of things. For about the first year, I used to say, I'm just throwing a bunch of shit against the wall to see what sticks.
Mhm.
One of the things I did was journal at the suggestion of my therapist because I have journaled kind of off and on, and it really does help me to process my thoughts and feelings when I can't name them necessarily. So I started to journal, and that all of those journal entries eventually evolved into my book. Because the other thing I did a lot of during the first 6 months in particular was I read everything I could get my hands on, because I thought I felt so alone. I felt like, nobody understands what I'm going through. I had wonderful community support, friends and family, but nobody had lost a child. They didn't understand. And
Mhm.
so I read everything I could get my hands on, and some books were helpful, many were not. But one of the things that I noticed is none of them really made me feel better. That sounds weird. The content might have been helpful and relatable, and, it would resonate with me. But what I decided I wanted to do was put something out in the world that would be a resource to parents who had lost children, but would also contain some beauty. Because there's such darkness when you lose a child, and it's easy to focus on that darkness. And I wanted to balance that out with a little bit of beauty. So I connected with a graphic designer who did these 6 original illustrations of a bird because I kept seeing the same bird in the days and weeks following Max's death. And the way she laid out my book, it's like she got inside my head. There's color on every page. There's these images of these birds in pieces and parts. There's family photos that she lays out kind of in a scrapbook type of fashion. She has pull-out quotes that are in different colors and, different fonts. It's just I'm so proud of what she and I were able to accomplish together. And I feel like I achieved that goal of providing content that would be helpful to a mom who lost a child, but also balance that with a little bit of beauty. Always have a hard time describing that, but I I felt like that would have been helpful to me, and I hope it's helpful to others.
I read your book, and thank you. I know you read mine. And that is what stood out to me. Exactly what you just said, the balance of the light and the dark and the pain and the beauty and the honesty. You said something before when you started sharing that jumped out at me when I actually like circled it, highlighted it. It was when you said just now how perhaps you weren't as sensitive or as compassionate as Max needed you to be. That is so honest. Like, I commend you and admire and respect the hell out of you for being able to put that on paper and then say it. And I'm sure you say it often because I think it really normalizes the humanity of
Mm,
everybody. Like we all
mhm,
wish we could be more empathetic and sympathetic, but then when it's your child and
mhm,
they pass away, and I'm sure then that comes with some guilt, right? Like,
mhm,
well, maybe if I would have understood more, if I would have been there more, whatever. And I know that you did get there. You did, like before he did pass away, that grew in you, right? Like you did get there. But just to put that out there, that's something that I think is really important for listeners, especially people who have lost children, to be able to accept that reality of our humanity. Maybe it's
mm,
fear that drives that. Maybe it's some denial in there, right? Like nobody wants to see their child suffer. And I think it takes like a real deep level of like willingness to like see that pain and to be in that pain to then have that compassion. So I think it's completely natural and normal. And I really commend you for saying that. And, you know, in your book about the beauty and the light and all of that, what I kind of wanted to talk about today is like, again, normalizing this idea of it's okay to be okay. And
mm,
whatever that means to each of us, what that okay looks like, totally up to you to define. Does not need to look like what my okay looks like. The only universal okayness that I could think of is just moving forward,
mm,
continuing to live in
mm,
whatever way, right? Like you thought about killing yourself at some point, you know, like that's probably very natural and normal too. I had
mhm,
feelings like that after I had a boyfriend who died early in recovery. That thought came to me and it scared me and that spurred
mm,
to action, right? But I think that that's probably another very natural, normal emotion.
mm,
But then to like say, okay, no, like I'm not going to do that. I have something to live for. Like that to me could be an okay, you know,
mm.
to look like any great big things. Like you are doing great big things, but I'm saying for the listeners, just continuing on is a great big thing, you know, like that's in and of itself, that's enough, you know, that it,
Amen.
right?
Yep.
And we hear that there's a popular book called It's Okay Not to Be Okay. And that's so useful. And it's so huge for us to be okay in our pain, like knowing that we're allowed to give ourselves permission to be in the
Yeah.
pain, to be in the sadness. But then at some point, and I feel like almost like weird saying it because I feel like there's some like I feel like I'm tiptoeing a little bit because it's like blasphemy to suggest to some people. Like, how could you? That's so uncompassionate. How could you suggest that I can be okay? I'll never be okay. And maybe right now
Mm,
you feel that way and that's your truth and honor that and be with that. But I like to give hope. I'm an empowerment coach, right? And I like to provide that perspective of that might not last forever. Just be
right.
open to the idea that someday you can be okay. What do you think about that?
Gosh, I think that is so huge. And I think you touched on a couple of things that are really important to highlight. And the first is that at the beginning, when you're in that deep, intense pain, you can't see a way out. And like I said, I wasn't even sure I wanted a way out,
Yeah.
you know? But then at some point, I think the thought came to me is, I don't want to feel this way for the rest of my life. You know, I
Mhm.
have another son. I have Sam, who is, he's one of the loves of my life. I have a wonderful husband. We have a good life. And so I think at some point I thought, I don't want to feel this badly for the rest of the days that I'm here on earth. And so that's why I said earlier I started to throw a bunch of shit against the wall
Yeah.
would stick. And so, I went to the doctor and, one of the things that Max's death did for me was it shoved me into menopause. And so it happened very quickly, which is common. When we think about grief as just an emotional or a mental response, but I had a very strong physical response to my grief, and that was one of them. And so to go from perimenopausal to menopausal in the span of, a few weeks
Wow.
is devastating to your
Yeah.
body. I went to my GYN and talked a little bit about that and had to do some things from a medication standpoint. But, I thought at some point it wasn't in those first few weeks, but at some point I just thought, I don't want to feel this badly. And so I think there really needs to be that conscious decision
Mm.
because at the beginning, there's so much pain and you feel connected to your loved one through
Mm,
that pain. And it almost feels like you said blasphemous to let
mm,
go
uh-huh.
of that. But I think that over time, you realize that you stay connected through your love, not your pain. Mother's Day and Father's Day, my husband and I are like, they're just BS Hallmark holidays. Like, we don't even want to acknowledge them. But, so days like that are hard. When my son Sam got married a year and a half ago, that was really hard because Max wasn't there and he should have been. So there's still pain, and I will have that for the rest of my life, those milestones that he misses, those big events that he's not around for. And so, but I made that decision that I wanted to feel better. And the other thing that I realized pretty quickly was that I wanted to help others. And at the time, I didn't know that it would help me. I didn't realize the
Yeah.
connection there, but I just thought, I mentioned I read all these books and some were helpful, many were not. And so I thought, I want to put a resource out in the world that's going to be helpful for other people. And then once my book came out and I started to connect with these moms really all over the world, I realized how validating that was for me to connect with these other people who understood what I had been through, who validated my loss, who normalized my feelings. And that, I think, is huge. One of the things that I said to you earlier before we started is I think that community is a really critical part of healing. I don't think we can heal in isolation. I don't think you can heal in your bedroom.
No.
You need other people to just talk to and say, this is what I'm feeling. Like, is there something wrong with me? Because we all feel like we're doing it wrong. We all feel like
Mhm.
we're grieving incorrectly. We all feel like, gosh, I feel so bad. This can't be normal.
Mhm.
And talking to other people and connecting to other people who understand what we've been through just really helps with that. It helps us feel less alone. It
Mm.
helps us feel seen and heard. And I think all that is really important in healing.
So yeah, so then I guess the flip side of that, like, I feel so bad, this can't be normal. Maybe on the good days or the better days, that can't be normal. How can I actually be okay? If my
Mm,
child isn't here, there has to be something wrong with me. If I'm
mm,
not still, whatever it is, even if it's like a month and you get like a glimmer of like a good day.
yeah,
I'm Italian. You're Italian too, right?
yeah, yeah,
Black drape, right? Like somebody dies, they don the black drape, and that's it. They wear black for the rest of the hardcore, like old school Italian ladies. Like,
right, right.
and
The
so
rest
much
of their lives.
the rest of their lives. That's it. It's over. They
Yeah.
died with their loved one, right?
Mm,
And I think that is a calm. I met somebody yesterday. Actually, I was at like a farmer's market, and I met somebody whose brother passed away, and she said, "I feel like I died when he died."
God.
And I felt that similar feeling when my brother Jeremy died. But then it was very odd. I felt this immediate, like his spirit kind of like rush into me and then give me some kind of like life force. But I was existing in both at the same time. Like I was dead, but I was alive. It was a very strange experience. But to just be okay, like knowing that other people feel that way too, I think that's what helps me to feel okay when it's 7 years later and I'm still breaking down crying,
Right,
randomly. Like,
right.
that's okay. Or if I'm out, feeling really good and life is awesome and I'm doing great things and I'm taking trips and I'm going to celebrations and I'm doing this, that's okay too. Like, it's
Yeah,
all okay.
yeah, yeah. Well, two things that you made me think of as you were talking. The first is I get feeling like you died when your loved one died because I felt that way. I felt like, how am I supposed to go on living with like a piece of my heart gone?
Yeah.
I carried Max in my body. He was part
Yes.
of me. And so
Yes.
when he left this earth, I thought, oh, like, I don't know how to do this. But at some point, I thought, for me to die when he died is doing him such a dishonor. I want to live at this point, for both of us to a degree,
Yeah.
And, that's why this mission I have to elevate the conversation about mental illness, to increase awareness, to increase compassion, to talk about suicide loss openly because there's still so much stigma
Yeah.
and, secrecy surrounding it. I
Mhm.
mean, I know people who lost loved ones to suicide and they haven't told anybody. They feel such shame over the way that their loved one died that they can't even talk about it. And then, the grief thing, we live in such a grief illiterate society that I want to talk openly about grief to help to educate people. So
Mhm.
I think, fully living is honoring Max. I
Yeah.
think that's a way to honor his memory and to
Yes.
help other people get to know the amazing person that he was.
Mm.
And that feel that feels good. That feels good as his mom. That feels like a good purpose, if that
Mhm.
makes sense.
So I was at a workshop, leading a workshop called Living with Grief. It's a workshop that I do. And it's about how to live with your grief, the and both, right? And taking it
Yeah,
all in together. And it's not that we should want to feel good because our loved ones want us to, right? We hear that a lot. They would want
right.
you to be happy. They would want you,
Yeah.
and they,
He
I'm sure,
doesn't want you to feel sad. Yeah,
yeah. And that's
whatever.
a little bit of guilt. I feel like we could feel a little guilty. Well, I can't be happy. Even so, am I letting them down again? Because if they want me to be happy and I can't be, like that, right? There's a whole other layer of guilt.
Yeah,
But we can go forward in joy, in a peaceful state, feeling happy, celebrating life, just because we deserve it. Yes, it is an honoring, and that's a great way of looking at it. I love that. I love that. I had a boyfriend, like I said, who died when I was 8 months sober, and I said to my sponsor, what do I do?" Like I was worried I was going to relapse, and she
mm,
goes, "What way
mm,
would that be honoring him if you drank?" And I said, "You're right."
mm.
So that whatever it takes, right? Like I had to tell myself that in the beginning, and it was true. And I was staying sober for me and for him, who couldn't. Like he relapsed and overdosed, another overdose. Staying sober for the both of us. That
Yeah,
stuff works.
yeah, yeah, it does. That motivation, I think we can really pull on that to move forward. One of the other things that you said, Amanda, was, still crying 7 years later, still
Mhm.
breaking down. And so a couple things. First of all, it's the both and. That's another thing I think that we tend to think is I'm either happy or sad. Well, I think you can be both at the same time. Like I always have sadness in my heart because Max isn't
Sure.
here. But I
Yes.
can also be happy. I can also enjoy the other good parts of my life.
Yeah.
So it's not an either or. And it took me a very long time to realize that, very long time. But then the other thing, I did my grief certification through David Kessler. And, he talks about when we have those bouts of sadness, he talks about frequency and duration. So, like how do you know like how you're doing? He talks about the fact that if you're crying for hours every day, 7 years, 10 years later, you might need some additional support.
Hmm.
But, if you cry for even if you cry every day for a couple of minutes, then, that's probably okay. And so it's just I think that again, we think I'm either grieving or I'm over it. And I don't think those are the choices. I
No.
think we're grieving forever because we
Hmm.
lost someone that we deeply loved. And that's always going to impact us. And we can also live our lives to the best of our ability in a way that is experiencing joy and, again, honoring the person that we lost. So that's my goal. That's my goal.
I love that. I love the both and concept. I think sometimes we limit ourselves in terms of our emotional capacities. There is so much more space inside that like we could make space for all of those different things to exist together. And I think that's a great way to remove that guilty part of being okay or feeling happy or living your life because you know that that other grieving part, you're not leaving your person behind, right?
Mm-mm.
You're taking them with you. And if that feels a little sad that they're not here, that's okay. That can all exist and commingle together. There's a phrase in recovery we say, there's more room on the outside. And what that means is sharing about it. You're talking about being in community, right? Like being in
Mm,
isolation and we're stuck in our own selves. getting it out there, sharing it with others kind of sheds that light on it and takes some of that pain away, just knowing that
Mhm.
we're not alone.
Yep.
So there's also room for all of those emotions on the outside, right? They exist within us, but then we can be those things, feel those things outside, and then help others. I can't help anybody. I mean, yeah, I guess I could help people identify and normalize when I am sad and everything. But if I'm depressed and if I'm on the floor every day and I can't get out of bed, I can't do anything good out in the world. And I think our people in spirit kind of push us. Like
Mm,
they kind of push us to like go out there and do and be who we were always meant to be. I feel like I
mm,
found my true self really through my grief. What is
mm.
your experience with like a before, Erin after? How do you see yourself?
Oh, that's a good question. So I think one of the things that I will say is, my purpose now since losing Max is what I talked about earlier, is elevating the conversation about mental illness, suicide, loss, and grief. And so had Max not died, I do not think that I would be on this path. I wouldn't have this as my mission.
Sure.
However, a lot of the things in my past have come into play with what I'm doing now. For example, I mentioned earlier, I've been a journaler. So for me to journal after losing him was not, something completely out of my comfort zone, completely out of the realm of possibility. Like I had done it before and it had been helpful for me in processing feelings and thoughts. And so the journaling was something that carried through
Mhm.
and has allowed me now to write and publish a book. One of the other things is I have lots of experience facilitating groups. I was a corporate trainer. I've done lots of small group facilitation. And so for me to offer my online grief groups for bereaved parents, I'm tapping into all of those skills.
Yeah.
And, so again, it wasn't like I thought, I'm going to start to do grief groups and I have no idea how to facilitate a group. I had that background to pull from.
Mhm.
Same with the public speaking. I'm comfortable in front of a group. I have spent time talking to groups of people and educating them. All of these things in my past have kind of come together. And I think it's providential. I think that,
Mhm.
all of those have come together to allow me to do what I'm doing now. Again, to honor Max and to help others.
Mhm.
And that's been an interesting thing to see. There's been really nothing that I mean, I never published a book before, but there have been so many pieces that have just come together to help me and equip me to do what I'm doing now. And I'm very grateful for that.
It's almost like it's prepared you. Like all of the skill, all of the experience that you had before now has set you up to be in a really good place to go out in the world and use those skills just in a different way. That's always
Yeah.
very interesting to me. In a very purposeful, meaningful, and I'm sure your work before was purposeful and meaningful. It's just different. It's
Right.
much different in terms of purpose, meaning with healing people. You're helping
Right.
people to heal. Like what else are we meant to do with our pain?
Mm.
And to like help other people after we go through it. That's what I believe it's all for. I think life prepares us. I've
Mm.
experiences, we don't realize why we're doing something or why we're moved or pushed to do something. And then later in life, it becomes maybe a little bit more clear. Like you were totally, like you used the word equipped, well equipped to do the work that you do. You said you just got back from a conference. Is that you went to a conference recently?
Yeah, so I was invited to speak at a bereaved moms conference. I hadn't attended many bereaved parent conferences, mother conferences personally. At the beginning, it was journaling, and then for the first couple of years, it was working on my book with my graphic designer, and that gave me a purpose back then. Like I thought, I want to get this resource out in the world. I want to help others get to know my Max. And so that was, my purpose for those first couple of years. There's a lot of people who start to participate in those kind of conferences right from the beginning, and that was not me. But I did do one, and it was real small, and I found it to be very helpful. But the conference that I went to out in California was absolutely amazing. There was probably 130 moms who had lost a child. And I was hoping to be a blessing, but I was really taken aback by how blessed I was.
Mm.
Meeting these women. Again, when you have that commonality with someone, you're not starting from here when you're getting to know
No.
them. We're
Yeah.
starting from
Yeah.
way up
The
here.
instant bond. There's like an
Yeah.
instant bond through that pain.
Yes, an instant bond, an instant understanding, kind of this groundwork that you've both done that helps you just
Yeah.
kind of get past all of the like niceties and
Uh,
superficial stuff. So it was such a blessing to me. And, one of the things that I do when I'm invited to speak, again, is to help to educate. I talk about Max. I talk about his mental illness and what that looked like and what it was like to have a family member who struggled with a mental illness and just how hard that was, how painful it was, how ill-equipped I felt, and how, in some ways, desperate, because when your child is struggling, all you want to do is fix it.
mhm.
And to not be able to fix it was excruciating. And then I try to pull in information about suicide because, as I mentioned, there's still so much stigma attached to suicide. And I want to kind of normalize that and help people understand that a person who dies by suicide, first of all, it's better to say died by suicide than committed suicide because committed carries so many negative connotations, typically describes an immoral or illegal act,
Mm.
and suicide is a tragedy. And so I just want to kind of normalize the fact that these are real people that we're losing in this horrific way. And it's as a result of many different factors. It's not, like I mentioned earlier, Max just wasn't a COVID victim. COVID definitely came into play in his death, but there were multiple other factors involved as well. And then, just talk openly about the grief that I felt to just help combat that grief illiteracy that is so prevalent in our culture, And so that's what I try to do through my talks. And the thing that I have found so interesting, Amanda, is that with this group of moms out in California, everybody could relate to the grief piece. Everybody could relate to losing a child and how devastating that was. But there were some people who themselves have struggled with mental illness, and that piece of my talk resonated with them. There
Mhm.
were others who had been impacted by suicide, maybe not through the death of their child, but in another area of their lives. And so that piece spoke to them. And so I think that's what is so gratifying about being with a group of people and helping to elevate the conversation about these important topics is that it hits people where they are. It speaks to them based upon their experience and their background. And that's very gratifying to know that I can do that.
You're making a huge difference in people's
Oh,
lives,
well,
right?
thank you.
Like, you're welcome. Like, we never know what we're going to say and how it's going to affect somebody. What we might say could be that one thing, it could be one sentence that one of those women could take away from your talk or your time with them that you spent, whatever your interaction with them, that they take with them almost as like a mantra or permission, right?
Mm,
Probably give a lot of women permission, and fathers, I'm sure too, permission to, or sisters or whoever of victims of suicide, of people who die by suicide. And that's a great point. Thank you for pointing that out. That language is very important. So you're giving people permission to look at it differently, to shift
mm,
their mindset, to get rid of those stories that they're telling themselves that are keeping them in that pain, that
yeah,
are not allowing them. It's like this block. I don't
yeah,
really love the word stuck either, but I'm almost seeing like walking through sludge, like just
yeah.
trudging, like not getting anywhere, like you're trying and you just can't move and you're just stuck in this place. So whatever's blocking them from moving forward, making that progress, your words and the way that you have come to terms with everything and the way you're viewing everything is saving more lives.
Mm,
Just like you, I'm sure there are many other parents out there who have considered dying by suicide as well. Like,
hmm
for what is this for?
right.
So you're
Yeah.
doing great stuff. So can you just tell us a little bit, because I'm not sure a lot of people know, what is that mentality of somebody who just feels like I need to go, like I can't be here? Would can you shed light on that for us? Would that be okay?
Yeah, well, with Max, it was definitely part of his depression. He had major depressive disorder that was medication resistant. So he had tried umpteen uh, antidepressants to try to, help his mood, and none of them worked. When we went to clean out his room after he died, he had an entire Trader Joe's, grocery bag full of medications that he had tried that hadn't worked. He also had epilepsy. So that was a really delicate balance because some antidepressants can lower a person's seizure threshold.
Um,
It's very much a dance. It's very, that whole titration
mm,
and
mm,
balance. It's very difficult.
yeah.
But anyway, so his mental illness definitely played a part. I mentioned earlier that he wasn't all that great about taking care of himself. When he was diagnosed with major depressive disorder, he had struggled with depression for years before that. We didn't know it. Like looking back, I can see signs of his depression and anxiety even when he was a little boy.
Mm,
But we just thought he was particularly sensitive. We
mhm,
just thought he was maybe a little bit more dramatic
mm,
than the rest of us in his expressions and his responses. But all of that was a mental illness. The mental illness piece was a big factor. And I think that like most of us, he wanted a magic pill. He wanted to take something that was going to take it away and that he was going to be just like everybody else.
mhm,
And that doesn't exist. There's no magic pill. He didn't do a great job of eating well and exercising and sleeping. And, like the sleep piece is huge because people with mental, particularly depression and anxiety, have sleep disturbances. And
mhm.
sleep is so important to our mental well being. So it's this kind of vicious cycle. I keep mentioning COVID. So Max was an Uber driver. That was how he made his living. And so when COVID hit, nobody was taking Ubers.
Mm,
So he didn't have a livelihood any longer. His gym, he had just kind of started to get into it's Thai kickboxing. It's called Muay Thai. And he just over the last 6 months prior to his death, he had gotten really into that and really felt like, gosh, it was a way to get out aggression. It was a way to improve his mood through exercise and movement. And his gym closed. And, there was so much isolation. And for a person who already struggles with depression and anxiety, that isolation was just really devastating to him. So it was this multifaceted approach
mhm.
that came into play. He was so discouraged about the state of the world. You mentioned that, that election back in 2020 was so contentious. There was so much division, the George Floyd killing that deeply impacted him. And so all of these factors just came into play for him to decide that he couldn't handle it anymore. And we got a note from him. Max wrote us a note. And in the note, he said he felt like he was in a burning building and the only thing to do was jump. And that was incredibly hard to read as his mom,
Yeah.
but it also really helpful
Yeah.
because if you're in a burning building, of course that's going to be a thought that you have. Of course that's going to be a response that you have. It's like tapping back into 9/11.
I'm
All those
thinking that. Yeah.
yeah, all those people that jumped out of the Twin Towers.
Yeah.
That was not a rational, well thought out decision.
No.
It was an act of desperation, and I think suicide often is. The other thing about suicide is Max had been hospitalized numerous times for suicide ideation, but he always took himself to the hospital. He always checked himself in. It was never any sort of involuntary commitment that we had to do. And so I think that the research shows that people make the decision to take their lives in a very short period of time. It's that desperation, it's that building and building of all of the factors that I talked about until it's just like a snap decision. And I don't even like to call it a decision because I don't think they're in their
Sure.
right minds when they make it. But I think it can happen very quickly, and research backs that up. It's a very complicated, multifaceted issue, and I think that to reduce someone to a death by suicide is to not take into account all of the wonderful qualities that they had and all the good that they brought to the world. I think that we need to view it again as a tragedy with compassion rather than with judgment. I actually had a friend who said to me in the days after he died, I can't believe he did this to you. I'm so mad at you. I'm so mad at him. And I never was angry at Max. I knew how much pain he had been in. I had seen the suffering that he had undergone over those years. And frankly, as his mom, there was a piece of me that thought, my baby's no longer suffering anymore.
Yeah.
And I really wanted that to happen here. I really wanted that to happen when he was with me, but it didn't. Maybe it couldn't. And so, to know that he was finally at peace there was a part of me that took comfort in that. And, just to point out, that was nothing that somebody could have told me. Like if somebody had said to me, and people did, he's in a better place. Those platitudes that people throw out after you lose a loved one. If somebody had said to me, he's no longer suffering, he's in a better place, that was so infuriating to me because it wasn't helpful. It was dismissive in a way of my pain and of my loss. But for me to come to that realization was really helpful and huge. But again, that's not something that somebody else can tell you.
Yeah. Yeah. So it is. I'm sorry, what?
I was going to say, I don't know if that makes sense, but that seems to be what I hear from, lots of moms is, don't tell me that my son is in a better place because I'm going to punch you in the face if you do. That kind of thing.
So I need to come to it on my own. So whether it's true or not doesn't really matter. It's the delivery. It's the timing. It's right. Like I personally believe heaven, or wherever you believe your person is abundant joy and peace and love. And earth is a very, very, very difficult place to get by. So I believe my brother is not in a better place. It's not like they went to like another, state. Like they're just existing as a different form of energy and they are out of their pain. And I do want to kind of comment on what you said about like people who feel the desperation of needing to take their life. They just cannot be here. It is just excruciatingly painful. First, I believe that those people have a heart and a soul and like 10 times more feeling and bigger than like a lot of us. They feel so much that it's like pins and needles. Their nerve kind of like on the outside. And it is just so hard to be here and live in this very, very, very painful world.
Yeah.
And then you spoke to, I think it's a tough word for people to use, and you might not use it, but the word that was jumping out to me was relief. Almost like a relief for our person. Like I have a cousin who passed away 4 months before my brother, and I don't know if it was overdose, if it was maybe unintentional suicide. I feel like it was almost like, I don't really want to be here, but I'm not like intentionally trying to leave. But if I do, that might be okay, kind of thing. When I found out she passed, I got the phone call. I felt immediate relief for her. Now, again, this is my cousin. It's not my child. However, I think there could be a similar feeling that a lot of people maybe don't want to talk about because maybe that feels like, oh, like, how could you feel, And I think this happens sometimes with spouses as well, or when you're a caretaker for anybody for years and years and then they pass away. There could be that sense of relief. Like, first of all, they're out of their pain.
Yeah.
And B, I can now let myself move forward and live my life. I just think that relief piece kind of is something that people don't like to talk about a lot because it feels shameful.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we definitely had a sense of relief after Max died because he struggled for so many years. So we struggled right along with him as his parents, and I remember, and you're right, that's not something that you talk about because when you have that feeling of relief, the initial thought that comes into your head, at least mine, was, what kind of mother am I that would feel relief that my son is gone? But my husband and I joined a suicide survivor support group a year after Max died. As I mentioned earlier, we had tremendous support of family and friends, our church community. was hugely helpful. We had a marriage therapist. I had an individual therapist. Bill did as well for a period of time. But at the year anniversary of Max's death, we were all really still struggling. I think because that first year we kind of were white knuckling it through. Like, if I could just get to a year, I'm going to feel better. And then the year came and we didn't feel better. In some ways, we felt worse. And so we then joined a suicide survivor support group that was hugely validating, because then we were with people who understood exactly what we were going through. But I remember my husband talking about that relief that we felt. And it was COVID. So, it was a Zoom meeting. There were all these little boxes with faces in them and all of the nodding heads.
Mm.
And that was, again, so validating that he had the courage to say it to a group of people. And then they had the compassion to respond in the way that they did, like, yeah, me too. I can understand that. And that doesn't make you a bad father. That doesn't make you a bad mother. That doesn't make you, insensitive. Of course, you felt that because, our loved ones suffered and struggled for a long time. Yeah.
Thank you. And thank your husband for speaking about difficult stuff. This is difficult stuff. This is very sensitive, right? There's a lot of nuance that goes on with this. And I think you can say it because you've experienced it. So then other people understand the pain that you were in and are in and will be forever, right? But like, because you have that experience with it, they can trust you and they can respect what you have to say, instead of saying, well, you never lost a child. How can you say that? Right? The fact that it's coming from you, you are uniquely qualified. Your experience is uniquely qualifying you and your husband to say the tough stuff that might need to be said, that might help somebody. It's going to help somebody to normalize all of this. So, Erin, I just think the cat's meow. I really do. You're amazing. You're adorable. And you're just doing so much goodness for so much good for so many people. So, okay. So we're running out of time here. So is there any last little tidbit of wisdom or a message that you'd like to leave our listeners with?
So, we've kind of been dancing around the guilt. I just want to talk about that for a second, more than a second. But, when you lose a child, the guilt that you feel can be overwhelming. We're responsible for these people that we bring into the world, and we think we should be able to fix whatever is wrong in their lives. And so when we lose a child as a parent, the guilt can be overwhelming. And I always say, it was just 5 years a few weeks ago for Max's passing. And I always say I could still come up with a new what if every day if I tried. I really could. Something that I could blame myself for and take responsibility for, because as his mom, I should have been able to keep him alive, right? And so I think that you need to understand that when you lose a child, you're going to feel guilty. Experts say that our brains would rather feel guilty than helpless. So we take that on. We take responsibility for things that aren't in our control. And so I think understanding that guilt is normal and natural. And what has really helped me is to change those what ifs to even ifs. So just as an example, one of the things that I felt tremendous guilt about was that I slept through the night that Max took his life. And now, don't misunderstand me. I was not in the habit of calling him in the middle of the night. We didn't have lengthy conversations at 2 o'clock in the morning. Yeah. But, that was one of those things where I thought, what kind of mother could I be that I didn't sense that something was so wrong that he was contemplating suicide? And so I beat myself up about that for months afterwards. And so once I said to myself, okay, even if I had woken up and had kind of a weird sixth sense, even if I had called him, would it have made a difference? Maybe in that night, but maybe the next night would have been the same outcome. Yeah. So I think that understanding that guilt is common and natural and normal, and also realizing that as parents, we take responsibility and try to control things that are just not in our control. Yeah. And so we can let those go, and we can do that with kindness and compassion to ourselves. Because that's another thing I see in a lot of these parents that, to your point, are like sludging through mud. They can't let go of the guilt. They just can't.
Mhm.
And I think that that can really keep us trapped in that pain. And there's been some things too, Amanda, that people have said to me, have you thought about, X, Y, or Z? And I'll say, no, I haven't thought about it. And I can't think about it
Mm.
because all it's going to do is serve to pull me back down into that darkness and that intense pain. And there's nothing I can do about it, like a mistake I made when he was 16. What am I going to do about it now?
Yeah.
Nothing.
That's pointless.
Yeah. So I think that understanding that guilt is normal, but we don't have to stay stuck in it. We don't have to tell ourselves those stories that reinforce I'm to blame for my child's death. Because I think as parents, that's a really common tendency.
So super quick, how do you think, how can they do that? I know journaling is something you're very passionate about. We've talked about. Is there any other suggestions that you might make for people to alleviate themselves of that guilt?
Yeah, I think, taking those what ifs and turning them into even ifs. I think that can be a helpful exercise. And then I also I'm going to go back to the community. Connecting with other people who have experienced a child loss is hugely helpful. So you can say, like my husband did, like, we felt a little bit of relief after Max died. And people said, yeah, we did too. Like I don't think that you can overstate how healing that is
Yeah.
to have somebody reflect back to you what you have thought or felt. I just think it's huge.
It is huge. Again,
So
sometimes we need that permission. We need somebody else to say, you're allowed to feel this way.
yeah,
You're
yeah,
not a bad person for it because I feel that way and many other people feel that way. Yeah,
yes,
that's so important. That's great. All right, so
yeah.
tell everybody where they can find your book and you and all your events and workshops and everything that you're doing.
Absolutely. So my book is available really wherever books are sold. It's on Amazon, it's on Barnes and Noble, it's on BookBub. So people can it's a print version as well as an ebook. So people can do either one. And I was really concerned that the ebook wasn't going to come out well because there's so many graphics, so many images, so many illustrations. But my designer did a great job of converting it to an ebook. So it really still carries the punch that the print book does. You can find me on my website, which is erinblechman.com. And that's kind of a one-stop shop. It has information about my book, my grief groups, my community talks. So people can connect with me through that. People can also connect with me on Instagram and Facebook and kind of LinkedIn. I'm really trying to create more of a presence on LinkedIn, but this social media is a little bit more difficult for someone of my age and stage. So
Yeah.
I'm doing the best I can. And I'd love to hear from people. I'd love to hear what they think about this conversation. I would love to hear from people who ultimately get my book and read it. I'd love to hear how it has helped them or how it resonated with them. So yeah, I just would love to hear from people because again, connecting with other and dads too, but bereaved moms really are my heart. That has been hugely healing for me is to connect with these other, strong women who are honoring their kids by living their lives fully. And I think that's really a beautiful thing. So I love to connect with those people, as many as I can.
That is really beautiful. And I just want to let the listeners know a lot of the groups that Erin hosts are virtual, right?
Yeah, they're all virtual.
All
Yep.
virtual. So
Mhm.
you can hop on from anywhere. That's
Yeah.
probably the only good thing that came out of COVID was the Zoom and how we can all connect in this much bigger way. So
Yes, I agree.
thank you so much, Erin. Really appreciate you being here. And I'll talk
Thank
to you
you.
soon.
Okay. Thanks
Bye.
again. Bye-bye.